Hello, we're going to talk about Browning Chapter 7. Okay, let me do a screen share here. All right, here we go. Okay, we're talking today about exploring state Department of Education grant applications, and there is a State Department of Education website. And if you Google State Department of Education grant portal, it'll take you to the portal where you can do unique searches for the type of grants that you're looking for. And so let's talk about here. Okay, so what type of grants do they have? A pass through federal grant, right? What does that mean? That means that the federal government gave the state money to give out. Instead of the federal department being involved in the giving of the money, they pass it over to the states, and the states actually do the disbursements. Why does the federal government do this? Well, generally, these are for smaller loans. The federal government doesn't involve themselves, I don't think, with anything under like a million or a couple of $1 million, right? So when it needs to do grants that are smaller, 300, 400, 500K, generally it may delegate that responsibility to the states. And so that's passed through federal. Okay. Highly structured applications, that's almost all State Department down to the T. You following the directions down to how many characters, characters with spaces, characters without spaces, words, all of that is extremely important because ultimately, if you're submitting this grant into a system, the system's only going to take the amount of characters that it's allowed you to do. And sometimes these systems can be a little wonky sometimes. And so you just have to be careful with that. Compliant driven, right? Everything's about compliance, about measurement, and being compliant exactly with what they're looking for and what they're giving the money for. Because a lot of the money that they're giving is sometimes comes with a lot of different rules, regulations, maybe laws that get passed, things like that, where the money has to be given in a very precise type of way. And then the higher the funding, higher funding success rates usually come when all of these things, sort of fall in place. And we'll talk a little bit about that, particularly the rubrics, and then essentially writing to the rubric. Okay. All right. Authorizing legislation grants are usually tied to federal or state law. Okay, we're talking about state grants. Okay, not any grant. State grants are tied to federal or state law. Okay, they're giving the money because there was some law or they're delegated by some law. It's rare when I get state grants. It's rare that I would get a state grant that isn't there hasn't been a law already that has authorized the money to be spent in that particular way. Okay, and it's also they define the allowable activities. There's different nuances. It's very important to read the request for proposals and understand what they're funding and particularly what they're not funding. If you put something, if you're trying to fund something that they're not funding, that'll get you disqualified. Some common things is sometimes they don't any type of hardware or any supplies or anything that's going to last more than a year. Usually, those are the type of things that generally are nuanced in the way that a lot of the times don't get funded. Okay, so an example is authorizing. There's a grant authorized under ESSA Title One to support low income students. Okay, the money's already been authorized. The money's already there. It just needs to be spent. And so whoever applies for that money, if you're serving low income students, there's obviously a operational definition of what low income students are that you must qualify for. No, nobody can just say, "Oh, I'm serving low income students." Okay, otherwise Beverly Hills would be able to say that, right? Anybody could say that, but do you fit the definition of what that means? That's really what we're talking about. When they're authorizing particular money for a particular purpose, you must fit a particular definition. Okay. Okay, local educational and agencies. There's a precise definition of what that is, but that's going to be all of your school districts, all of your schools, all of those higher educational institutions, all of those particular institutions are going to be LEAs. I know we might not always hear the term, but that's what they call them in the grant world. Offices of Education, institutions of higher education, et cetera. So an example is of how a grant might read is eligible applicants must serve schools with 40% free and reduced price meals. I mean, in the Central Valley, that's easy to achieve. I mean, the research that I did in the Central Valley, it's pretty hard. I mean, unless you're like in the Clovis school districts or some unique school district like that, or some particular area of Fresno County, almost always schools in all of our rural areas and the majority of Fresno Unified schools, you're going to get at least 40% FRPM. And so, but that's a definition of, if this is what they're looking for, you must fit that definition. Okay. Okay, funding priorities. Let's talk from the most important to the least important. When they say absolute priorities, they mean absolute priorities. You must fit that priority precisely. There's no if, and, or buts about it. An example is applicants must address absolute priority 1, improving literacy outcomes for students in grades K to 3, right? You can't be serving, 2nd to 4th grade. It's not going to work. They're looking for K to 3, okay? Competitive means that you get extra points if you address these things. And, an example is applicants that propose serving rural LEAs may receive up to 5 additional points, okay? I write a lot of grants like these, particularly because we're in the Central Valley, and a lot of times we do get extra points. I just working on a grant right now precisely that we have to service Alpine and El Dorado counties. Does anybody know where Alpine and El Dorado counties are? It's pretty far from Fresno, but right? And who's going to serve those counties? Well, if it's up to people's choice, no one's going to serve those counties, right? It's too far to go up into the mountains to be able to serve them. And so if you do serve them, the only way to get any service out there is to give applicants that, maybe close by or could drive there in a couple of hours to service them and give them extra points. Okay. And then you have invitational priorities, right? The department, here's an example. The department is particularly interested in projects that incorporate AI supported tutoring models. Okay. What this means is if you're doing this, those are the precise type of applications that they're looking for. Okay. They're trying to kind of fund a new area, go into a new area. And so those are priorities that they have. People who are actually doing this are going to be looked at quite favorably in, the grant distribution money, okay, or the granting money, okay. All right, requirements, again, strict formatting rules, okay. I can't stress this enough, okay. You have to be very precise. You have to be kind of like a type A personality to make sure that you do this. I write with a colleague of mine who I've been writing with him for about 20 years. He's been writing grants for about 40 years and very, very good writer, but he really likes to tell a story. And so then it's always my job to come in and chop his story, 2-page story, into 1 paragraph, right? Because of word limit, character limit, all of those things. You got a very fixed page limit, right? Sometimes word character limits are very strict. And then sometimes they say character limit with or without spaces. That also is very important. And I just know because the grant I'm writing right now, they have a lot of the narrative questions have a 2,500 character limit, but they don't say spaces or not, right? And so if they count the spaces and you don't, once you put your narrative into their system, it's going to chop off the last part of it, right? Because you were assuming one thing and they were assuming another thing, right? You have standardized forms for budget, work plans, and logic models. I'm going to give you some examples here, but they're not fully drawn out examples. Sometimes a budget, could be, 50 lines. A logic model, generally it's only 1 page. A logic model is 1 page. But a work plan could be, 5, 6 different pages, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. The ones I'm giving you are sort of brief, right? But it depends, especially if they don't have a page limit or if these things don't work against their page limit. Sometimes they don't work against their page limit. You got a little bit more time to use this a little bit as a narrative, a work plan to tell a little bit more of the story, to expand upon the story. But again, don't obviously put in new things that you haven't written in your narrative. All of these things have to sort of match up, right? And then required file names, strictly follow the naming conventions that they tell you, exactly how they tell you they want the document name. That's how you should be naming the document. Okay, all right. The writing to rubric, right? I know you probably, all teachers probably, give students rubrics or teach with rubrics or grade with rubrics. Well, in grant writing, particularly in these state grants and many grants, probably like 85% of the grants I write, there's a rubric of how they're going to grade your grant, right? Point-based scoring, very explicit criteria, and then there's very limited reviewer discretion. What does that mean? Is the reviewer has to follow the rubric when they grade you. They can't just go off on a tangent and essentially these rubrics, the intention of these rubrics is to really quantify a qualitative process, which is important because you don't want people complaining or filing a complaint or asking questions. When money is involved, a lot of people can get mad when they don't get funded, right? And so they want a little bit of that as possible by saying, hey, we told you up front exactly what you needed to do to get the grant. We measured what you did with the rubric and you did not do that, as good as you could have. And this is why you got the score and this is why you didn't get the grant. Okay. A tip is that each paragraph should score points, right? And so understanding that is extremely, extremely important. And the first sentence of every paragraph should be the most important sentence. Okay. All right. Here's an example of a rubric. Okay. I mean, there's many, but this is an example of the overview, right? It's the question is providing an overview of community and student populations, existing career technical education pathways, existing early college credit and dual enrollment programs, et cetera, right? You may get 8 to 6 points, 5 to 3, or 2 to 0. So this is like 0 to 8 points, okay? And so these are the things that you have to follow, right? The people that are writing, like you, writing the grant, have the rubric, and the people grading you have the rubric as well, okay? And this is what you have to do generally, like 8 to 6 points, is address each component, right? Provide clear and highly detailed narrative responses of community and student populations, existing pathways, existing programs, propose new pathways, and aligning regional and state force priorities. And I actually cut it off. It goes further on, but essentially this is going to give you a little bit of an overview of when you write, you got to go and check every one of these off. Did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? Did I write about this? So it really systemizes the writing process. It logically forms it. It structures it. If they tell you to write it in this format, don't change these around. Make it really easy. Don't think about yourself as the writer. Think about the reader. How am I going to make it the easiest possible way for the reader to follow exactly what I wrote, to follow it in the order that I wrote it, to be able to get the most possible points? Okay. Here's another example of a budget for a rubric, right? Providing a budget narrative for activities and work anticipated in the grant period. How will you ensure the budget is realistic, accurate, and aligns with the work plan and the timeline? Okay. And we'll probably talk more about budgets, but every budget has to have a budget narrative. Okay. The budget narrative really explains the budget that you just wrote. The budget's numbers are not self-explanatory. Someone has to tell the reviewer, what do these numbers mean? How are these numbers calculated? Okay, that type of thing. All right. And so for comprehensive, here you explicitly address each component, providing clear and highly detailed narrative. The budget narrative provides comprehensive detail for activities, work anticipated in the grant. It's highly realistic, accurate, and aligns with the work plan and the timeline. So a lot of people, when they start writing a grant, they write the budget first. Then they write the work plan. And the work plan, generally, the timeline is generally sort of built into the work plan. But sometimes in the timeline, they might want more detail. Maybe your work plan just says, I'm going to do this in year one, I'm going to do this in year two. And the timeline they want, what are you going to be doing every quarter or every month? That type of detail. Okay. Okay. Then you got to write the abstract. Obviously, you write the abstract at the very end, as you know that. This is going to really mirror the rubric language. An example, right? A program that will serve 240 K3 students. Definitely have to have that in your abstract. You have to have how many students you're going to be serving, because ultimately they want to know what is the amount that you're, funding per student. Sometimes in grants, in these state grants, they tell you, you can provide an after-school program, but we're only going to offer per student, per day, $10, right? So if you're serving 10 students, right, that's $100. They're only going to provide $100 a day. Obviously that's not enough. You have to probably in a grant like that have matching funds, right? But they tell you a lot of times exactly not how many students they'll fund, but how much funding they'll provide per student. Okay, so this is an example of an abstract. Okay, Sierra Vista Unified proposes to implement a comprehensive after-school education and safety program at 3 elementary schools serving high-need students. Only 40% currently meet the ELA standards, and chronic absenteeism exceeds 20%. The program will serve 630 students daily for 180 school days, providing a minimum of 15 hours per week of expanded learning services. Very detailed with the numbers, providing all the numbers, the timeline, how long it's going to last, how many hours, how many students. The district will partner with community-based organizations to ensure high-quality enrichment programming and culturally responsive youth development practices. The district is not going to do this work. They're not going to generally get their teachers or somebody to do this work. That may be too expensive. They're going to hire community-based organizations, CBOs, right? What they call nonprofits, right? They're the ones that they're going to hire and give them the money to be able to do this work. By year 3, the program will increase ELA and math proficiency among regular students by 6% points, reduce chronic absenteeism by 10%, improve student engagement and connectedness as measured by annual surveys. Okay, so this is a good abstract. It gives you everything that you're going to need there, or you give them everything that they're going to need. Okay, then you get into the narrative. Is really the heart of the grant. The narrative was where you actually put in the words, type it in, right? The narrative, the story, okay? The heart, right? You need to have a need statement, right? You're going to have state and district data that tells, that is used to say, hey, this is the need that we have. You avoid emotional language, right? Let me see if I can find an example of one. I'll look at later. I usually have a bunch of data ready to go for every county. And let me see if I can bring it up. Actually, this is probably important for me to show you this. For every county, I have a lot of different data ready to go because I don't like to pull data for every grant over and over again. So I usually have a bunch of data ready to go. And it's usually good for 2 or 3 years sometimes. I mean, you can a big important grant, you want to update it very continuously, but generally the data doesn't go out of date immediately. Okay, all right, so let me pull this up. Okay, so all right, okay, where are you all? Let's see here. Okay, let me share the data here. Okay, all right, so this is data ready to go, right? We got 5 counties, right? Fresno, Madera, Merced, and then the bonus counties are Alpine and El Dorado. Look at this, population 1,000. This one is a little bit bigger, population 192,000, but nothing compared to Fresno that has 1 million, right? Merced that has almost 300,000, right? Here's all your basic demographic data: race, ethnicity, households with computers, per capita income, poverty rate, immigrants, undocumented, refugees, people 65 years or older. But Did I have other data? Sorry, this is just the demographic data. I did have other data on schools. Let me see if I can pull that up. Okay, go back. I have to probably find it later. Right, I don't have it readily available. Let me see here. Okay, I don't have it readily available. Okay. Um, all right. Okay. Let's see where you are again. Okay, here you are. There you are. Okay. Let's go back to here. All right. Okay. Here's an example of a neat statement, right? This is Del Oro Elementary School District in Tulare County. Their after-school education and safety program, right? They're gonna, they serve 1,032 TK to 8 students in a rural agricultural community. 82% qualify for free and reduced price meals. 41 English learners. 18 identified as migrant seasonal agriculture youth. Unduplicated pupils is 89%. Academic performance reflects a significant need. Remember, I told you the most important sentence is the first one? There you go. They tell you exactly what the need is before they give you the details. Okay. In 2024, 38 met or exceeded the standards, and 34 in math, both below state averages. Okay. So they're comparing it to the state. English learners met ELA standards at 24%, right? So they give you all the data. Family report limited access to safe, structured school, after school supervision due to work schedules and a lack of youth programs. These conditions demonstrate a clear need for expanded learning opportunities that provide targeted. Okay, so what's going on here? Families report they got internal data. They're surveying their families. They're collecting data from their families. Maybe it's anecdotal data, right? This is a summary, but ultimately, if you do have that type of anecdotal data, you want to put the quotes in there. You want to know how you collected it, how many families you collected it from, right? How are you connected to listening to the families and what their needs are? That's the kind of data that would be very, very useful in a grant like this. Okay. All right. So then you have to have the evidence base, right? And so here's an example here. The proposed expanded learning program will implement evidence-based literacy and math intervention, aligned with California's MTSS framework. Academic support will incorporate structured literacy practices grounded in the science of reading, including explicit phonemic awareness, systemic phonics, instructional and guided oral reading strategies. Okay. Research demonstrates that explicit systematic instruction improves reading outcomes for struggling readers, particularly English language learners, students with low income backgrounds. Here's the evidence right here. Okay. They're having their citation right here. Okay. All right. Small group tutoring, one-on-one ratio will be delivered a minimum of 3 days per week using high dosage tutoring principles shown to produce strong academic gains. Okay, there's the Adberg Institute. There's a citation. We'll eventually have our references, right? More evidence right here, right? The program will integrate evidence-based social emotional learning practices aligned with Cassell competencies, which research links to improved academic performance and school engagement. Durlak et al. 2011, right? And so forth and so on. All of this is really tied to evidence. What does the research show? Are we doing things that people have already written about, have done before, and have been shown to work? That's exactly what we want. Okay, plan of work or work plan, right? A lot of people call it the work plan. And some people call it the plan of work, but really the work plan. You have to have your activities, your timeline, and who's going to do it. Okay. And I have a lot of examples of these work plans, but I'm just going to, for sake of this example, In this video, we're just going to show you an overview, right? An expanded learning program will be implemented over a 3-year period using a phased approach to ensure quality, fidelity, and sustainability. Okay, year one, right? Generally, you want to do month per month or quarterly, but right now we're just doing a broad overview. We're going to do planning and implementation. Okay, the district will hire a coordinator, site-based after-school leads by August. Staff will receive professional development, youth development, alignment, and structured literacy intervention prior to program launch. By September, the program will begin serving 600 students daily, right? Academic support sessions will be delivered in small groups with biweekly progress monitoring. Year two, data from attendance, benchmark assessments, climate surveys will be analyzed quarterly to refine programming. Partnerships with local CBOs will expand STEM and art enrichment offerings. Okay, so this is after year one, you put the program, it's running, and then we're going to move to really refining it and improving it. Okay, and year three, sustainability and scale. You'll have successful practices will be integrated into the district's LCAP and ELOP funding structure. The district will formalize staffing pipelines and maintain community partnership to ensure long-term sustainability beyond the grant period. What they're saying is that we know eventually the money's going to run out. We have a plan to continue this, and that looks really, really good for funders. They're like, hey, we just need to give them money for 3 years, and they have already a plan for how they're going to pay for it after that. Okay. Budget and evaluation, remember allowable cost only, right? Using their own state budget forms that they have. And then always generally for state grants, it's good to have an independent evaluator, somebody who is not working for the school that can truly, write an evaluation that is independent and can show you the strengths and the weaknesses of your program. And here's sort of a big overview of a sample of a budget sample right here, right? Generally, the examples are much more detailed. Right here, we have certified salaries, right? 1 FTE, which is full-time equivalent. That just means you could have hired 2 people that have time or 4 people at a quarter time, but ultimately, you got to be able to count the FTEs. And this is going to be 110 for 1 FTE. Generally, you would put everybody's salary that's going to be involved in that program and making that program happen. You got classified salaries, benefits at 28%, books and supplies, services and operating expenses, professional development, transportation, and indirect costs at 5%. Usually, a lot of times that could be higher. That could be sometimes up to 15%. Actually, 15% is actually very standard. 15% indirect. That just means that the district is going to, or the school is going to make, probably the district is going to make 15% on the grant, and they need that money for their own administrative overhead. Okay. All right, and then here's an example of an evaluation plan. And always understanding evaluation is very important. Never assume that that's just an afterthought. Right? It's important the district will implement a comprehensive evaluation plan to measure program effectiveness, ensuring continuous improvement, and demonstrate alignment with ACE's performance expectations, so forth and so on. And then at the end of the little explanation, you have a little table of the measurable outcomes, right? Increase the LA proficiency, how you're going to measure it, what's the baseline and the target, and by when will you reach the target. Okay, so you're going to improve proficiency, you're going to improve math achievement, you're going to reduce absenteeism by 5% by year 2, and you're going to improve student engagement by 13% every year. Okay. All right. The technical review process, you have compliance, peer reviewed, and funding recommendations. The key thing to remember here is sometimes the state will hire outside experts to be able to review these grants because they don't have the capacity to review all of them. So say the after-school programs, what they would do is they would get somebody who's an expert in after-school programs who has maybe written about them, written some professional academic articles about them that is in the field of academia or the like to be able to review these proposals and make recommendations. The action steps is marking up the guidelines, attending technical assistance workshops or webinars that they have. Almost every state grant is going to have a webinar that's a month or 2 months sometimes before the actual deadline of the grant. Highly encourage you attending those and to be able to ask questions, and then also to find out who else is applying. A lot of times you go and you scope out who the competition is, and then also you go and you find out what kind of questions other people were asking. Something that usually they've already read the request for proposals, and now they're asking questions that weren't maybe so clear in that request for proposals. Using compliance checklists and then submitting your grant early, which could be a couple of days, maybe a week. You don't really a lot of times have too much time to submit the grant early, but I think what they're saying is don't submit it the day of. If you can try a day or two before, in case you run into some sort of kinks where you're missing a particular document or a particular signature, you're not left with those details at the very end. Okay, common mistakes for eligibility and priority is proposing activities outside those that are authorized by legislation, ignoring absolute priorities, which we talked about are extremely important and you must address, and assuming that your strong writing can overwrite ineligibility, and it can't. It doesn't matter how great of a writer you are. If you're not eligible, you're not eligible. And then also, it does matter if you're a weak writer. If there's too many typos and there's too many errors, and yeah, that's going to affect you. But if you're an extremely, extremely good writer, that's not going to overcome ineligibility. Okay. Mistakes in form and formatting in forms, exceeding the page limit, using incorrect fonts or margins. Sometimes they tell you can only use this or that font. Only they give you one or two choices. Altering state budget templates. Those are usually the boxes are locked, right? When you add a number, it self-calculates for the total. Don't be messing and overwriting the way that they've programmed those templates. They do it for a reason. Okay. And then also missing required assurances, of something, a particular signature of one type or another. Okay. Mistakes in writing to the rubric is writing narratively instead of rubric aligned, failing to address the point values that are explicitly stated, and then assuming the reviewers are going to infer alignment when it's your responsibility to show how everything aligns, the budget, the work plan, the timeline, and the narrative, how everything aligns. Okay. Common mistakes in the abstract is writing the abstract first. Usually write the abstract last. Okay. Introducing information that was not found elsewhere, right? The abstract should only have information that is going to be in the grant. Nothing new. Okay. No more research, no more nothing. Okay. You just use what you already have. And using vague language instead of numbers, right? Particularly for state and federal grants, they want numbers. How much money are you asking for? How many people are you going to serve? How many hours are you going to serve them, which is the dosage, right? If you have a program that says I'm providing 15 hour dosage, means that you're going to give them 15 hours of time or 15 hours of programming or something like that. Okay. Mistakes in the needs statement are using national data instead of your state and district data. It's much easier to find the national data, right? Because there's so many databases at the national level. It's much harder sometimes to find the state and the district data, but you do have to make an effort and you do have to provide that data. Particularly, we're talking about state grants today. And state grants, they want to see the state data, that you understand it and that you're utilizing it to help shape and form your program. Describing problems with quantifying them and including solutions in the problem section. The problem section is to state the problem, not to list solutions. Okay, evidence-based mistakes, confusing best practices with evidence-based practices, failing to name evidence tires, and then citing outdated or irrelevant research. What is outdated or irrelevant research? Generally, it's like in the fridge, right? You have bread. How long can you keep bread for, or eggs, right? Or tortillas, right? Generally, those things, they start growing mold after a while. There's what you call shelf life, right? And then a lot of food that you buy in cans or bottles that says expired by such and such date, like milk. You don't want to drink milk that's expired, right? It has a shelf life. Well, the same for research. Research has a shelf life. Generally, that shelf life is no more than 10 years. Some shelf life is a lot less, but generally, a good benchmark is 10 years. 10 years is generally the good benchmark for most research in most areas. So anything after that, you have to cite cautiously. Okay. Okay, mistakes in budget and evaluation is budgets are not aligned to activities. It includes unallowable costs, and then also treating evaluation as an afterthought, which it isn't. Evaluation should be a key and important aspect of your design and your research and the programming that you're doing. Okay, mistakes in submission is waiting until the deadline day. Yeah, you don't ever want to do that. Uploading incorrect file versions. So you got to be organized and not confirming the submission receipt. If you don't get a receipt that says, we got your grant, you kind of should follow up till you do. Almost always when I submit a grant, I get a receipt that says, okay, we got your grant. Not in every case, right? But generally for state grants, you almost always do get that, submission receipt. So, okay. Well, thank you all much. And I will see you in the next session.